details.
They say your greatest victory should feel like standing on top of a mountain, the wind in your hair, the applause echoing below, the whole world finally seeing what you always knew you were capable of. That is not how it felt for me. On the day Onyx Tech announced a record $3.2 billion in revenue, our highest ever, the number that made headlines, that made investors weep with joy, that made the CEO's voice crack with emotion on stage, I stood in the corner of a glittering conference hall with a paper plate of catered hors d'oeuvres and watched a stage full of men congratulate each other for what I had built. They didn't mention me. Not once. Not even a glance. And somewhere in the back of my mind, in that cold, quiet place I had learned to keep very still, I thought, fine. Remember this moment. Because what comes next is going to be mine. If you have ever poured everything you had into something, your mind, your time, your most brilliant years, only to watch someone else stand up and take the bow, this story is going to feel like you wrote it yourself. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been erased by the very people you saved? Because Ginny Harper's story is for every single one of you. Let's get into it. My name is Ginny Harper. And before I tell you what I did, let me tell you what I built. I joined Onyx Tech 4 years before that celebration. And when I say I joined during a crisis, I mean the company was hemorrhaging, clients walking out, credibility evaporating, a series of catastrophically botched product launches that had the board in emergency sessions every other week. The infrastructure was a disaster. The software stack was, and I am not exaggerating, a Frankenstein's monster of stitched-together legacy code, forgotten vendor contracts, and systems that technically functioned, but only if you held your breath and didn't ask too many questions. I was brought in quietly. No fanfare. No announcement. My title was Director of Strategic Operations, which was a diplomatic way of saying, we hope you can save us before we collapse entirely. I got to work. I built a modular rollout strategy that cut client onboarding time in half. I led the complete restructuring of our DevOps pipeline, pushed hard for microservices architecture when most of the senior engineers were still emotionally attached to monoliths and fighting me at every turn. I made enemies. You don't transform a culture without drawing blood, and I drew some. But I won more than I lost. And in the end, the numbers told the story. Stability. Growth. Dominance. Our biggest client, a multinational logistics firm that ran operations across 14 countries, once told me, Ginny's team doesn't just deploy code. They deploy confidence. I wrote that on a sticky note and kept it on my monitor for 3 years. So when the revenue announcement came and the champagne glasses clinked and Martin Velem, our CEO, stepped under that spotlight and talked about visionaries and risk-takers and the next generation of leadership, I expected, reasonably, to be acknowledged. Instead, I got an email. The subject line arrived in my inbox while the fireworks were still going off on the slide deck behind Martin's head. Compensation change notice. I read it twice. 3 times. My brain kept rejecting what my eyes were seeing, the way your mind refuses to process a car accident for a half-second after impact. It had to be a mistake. A bonus confirmation with a clumsy subject line. A formatting error from payroll. It was not. A 15% salary reduction. An adjustment to better reflect internal equity following organizational realignment. I stood in that room with a champagne flute I hadn't touched, staring at my phone, while people laughed around me and the slideshow behind the stage flashed portraits of key contributors, engineers, strategists, executives, faces I recognized, and a few I didn't. My face was not among them. I was standing 20 feet from the stage. I had rebuilt this company from the bones up. And I was not on that screen. Not a photo. Not a name. Not a single sentence. I watched the bubbles rising in the champagne glass. Rising, reaching the surface, and disappearing. Over and over. Endlessly. Going nowhere. I set the glass down on a passing tray. And I left. No one noticed. I walked past the valet stand, past the decorative topiaries, out into the cool night air. My heels were pinching. My shoulders were locked up inside my blazer. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't compose an angry email in my head. I just felt something settle into place, cold, quiet, and very, very deliberate. Because I knew something that nobody in that glittering room knew. The system, the actual digital infrastructure that powered everything Onyx Tech sold to every client in every time zone on every continent, had a heartbeat that only I understood. And lately, when I pressed my ear to the wall and listened carefully, I could hear it starting to stutter. They thought they could cut me out. They had absolutely no idea what was coming. The HR office always smelled the same, lemon-scented disinfectant and the ghost of coffee someone had forgotten to finish. It was too early in the morning for what was about to happen. The room was too quiet. Everything had that carefully arranged quality of a stage set before the actors come on. The email that summoned me had called it a quick check-in about your new role. Excited to collaborate on next steps. I knew better. Lena from HR greeted me with a brittle smile, the specific kind of smile you develop when your job requires you to deliver bad news to people who don't deserve it and pretend it's good. She gestured me toward the small round table rather than her desk. I noticed. Power Dynamics 101. Desk means I have authority and you're receiving a decision. Round table means we're just having a conversation between equals. It's designed to make you feel less like you're being managed out and more like you're being invited into a collaborative reimagining of your future. I sat down. I kept my expression completely neutral. We wanted to talk about how we see your next chapter here at Onyx. Lena began, folding her hands on a pastel notepad. We think your experience makes you a perfect candidate for a mentorship-focused role. You'd still be involved in key initiatives, but more from an advisory angle. Advisory, I repeated. The word tasted like old metal. Yes, she nodded, with the practiced brightness of someone who had delivered this speech before. Supporting the newer leadership. Offering guidance without the pressure of ownership. It's less about execution now, and more about legacy. Legacy. There it was. The beautiful corporate euphemism for burial. We're not firing you. We're preserving you. Like a museum exhibit. Something to be pointed at from a respectful distance. Who decided this? I asked. She hesitated. Leadership consensus. We're going through a transformation period, aligning with future-forward structures. I said nothing. I have learned, over years of boardrooms and difficult conversations, that silence has weight. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply not fill the space. Lena looked down and adjusted a paperclip that didn't need adjusting. We'd love your help transitioning the team, she added. You'll still have access to systems. Nothing is changing overnight. Everything had already changed. I left the HR office and went back to the 7th floor. My floor, the one I had worked on for 4 years. The one where I had fought and built and argued and produced. The glass-walled meeting room that had been my primary working space was glowing with a morning strategy session already in progress. I paused outside and looked in for just a moment. There she was. Chloe. Summer intern from last year. Fresh degree, bright eyes, that particular brand of nervous confidence that looks like competence at a distance. She was sitting in my chair, my specific leather swivel chair, with my specific view of the whiteboard, speaking to a room full of people who were nodding along with the focused attention of people who have been told, she matters now. Beside her, Samantha Velam, the CEO's daughter, recently installed as head of the new Office of Digital Transformation, fresh from Stanford with a philosophy degree and a LinkedIn bio that described her as a thought leader and vision strategist, was nodding with the exaggerated encouragement of someone performing mentorship for an audience. No one looked toward the door. I walked away before they could. The rest of that day was its own particular kind of quiet humiliation. My inbox filled steadily with handoff notes, files I had written, processes I had designed and documented and refined over years, being calmly reallocated to names I barely recognized. I was CC'd on all of it, which was supposed to feel like inclusion. It felt like being invited to watch your own estate be distributed. By 3 o'clock, my badge no longer granted access to the executive file server. By 4, I had been removed from the weekly director's sync calendar. By 5, my new title had appeared on the internal org chart. Senior Strategic Advisor, Legacy. Legacy. Again. My office had already been reassigned. An IT coordinator named Jordy, cheerful, oblivious, stopped by to ask if I needed help resettling into the shared project pod. resettling. Like I was a piece of furniture they hadn't quite decided whether to throw out or put in storage. I sat at a temporary desk for the rest of the week. No plaques. No framed client letters. No space for my books. The woman who had saved this company from collapse was now a shadow among cubicles, CC'd on emails she used to originate, invited to no meetings that mattered, and quietly being made to understand that her time was over. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It makes you very, very dangerous. Because in their rush to replace me, in the smooth, self-congratulatory efficiency of their transition planning, they had made one small mistake. Not dramatic, not obvious, but fatal. They forgot that the system they depended on wasn't finished evolving, and they had no idea how to read its pulse.
I did.
The house was silent that evening in a way that felt earned rather than peaceful. The celebration, the HR meeting, the slow erasure of my presence from every system and schedule and org chart, each had taken its piece of me. And now I sat cross-legged on my living room floor in the dim glow of a single lamp, the television off, no music, just the soft ticking of the wall clock and the occasional hum of the refrigerator cycling on. Outside, the street lights flickered, the kind of inconsistent flicker that makes you think they're deciding whether to stay on. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I was just sitting with boxes I hadn't touched in years. Old project files, client reports, ideas scribbled on napkins and the backs of printouts, the physical residue of 4 years of work that had mattered even when no one said so. And then I found it. A folder. Marked in my own careful handwriting. ONX_framework_V1. Confidential. I opened it. Inside, a printed copy of the original licensing contract I had drafted when I first rebuilt Onyx's modular operating system, the system the entire company still ran on today. Let me explain what happened 4 years ago, because this matters. When I first arrived at Onyx, the software infrastructure was beyond repair. Not salvageable, genuinely broken, a patchwork of forgotten vendor agreements and outdated systems that were held together by a combination of inertia and luck. The company couldn't afford to rebuild it properly. The budget request I submitted was denied. Too expensive, wrong timeline, not a priority. We were already losing clients. I didn't have time to wait for approval cycles. So I rebuilt it myself. Using a third-party architecture I licensed under my own name, paid for out of my own pocket, because the alternative was watching the company finish collapsing while the paperwork made its way through committees. I saved them. Again. Quietly. Without fanfare. And the licensing contract I signed was mine. My name, my signature, my terms. I read the relevant clause slowly, the way you read something when you already know what it says, but need to see it confirmed in black ink. License valid for 36 months, subject to personal renewal by original licensee. Failure to renew within 21 days of expiration will result in full system lockout and automatic deactivation of core services. My signature at the bottom. Not Onyx Tech's. Not Martin Velam's. Not the board's. Mine. And the expiration date? 19 days from today. I sat back slowly. The paper trembled very slightly in my hands. They had never updated the contract. Never transferred the license to the company's name. Too busy with rebrands and road shows and investor presentations and stage lighting, assuming that the details, the foundational, critical, load-bearing details, were being handled by someone else.
By me.
Except I was no longer an employee in any meaningful sense. I was a senior strategic advisor, legacy, background noise, a shadow in a shared project pod. And the system that powered every client dashboard, every data sync, every API call across every time zone and currency and industry that Onyx Tech served was about to go dark unless I, Ginny Harper, personally renewed it. I read the clause one more time. Then I closed the folder, slid it back into the box, and pushed the box gently under the couch. I didn't need to bring it into the office. I didn't need to send an email or make a call or schedule a meeting. I didn't need to announce anything at all. Let them stand on stages. Let them hand titles to Chloe and give Samantha her glass-walled office and celebrate the new generation of leadership with fireworks and champagne. Let them forget my name. In 21 days, the system would remember it for them. I want to be very clear about what happened next, because this part matters more than anything else. I did not hack anything. I did not sabotage anything. I did not delete a single line of code or corrupt a single file or insert anything malicious into any system, anywhere. What I did was far simpler and far more devastating. I sat at my home office desk, coffee going cold beside me, laptop open to the admin interface that no one at Onyx Tech had ever thought to restrict, because why would they? I was just the legacy advisor now, the background noise, the woman whose access no one had bothered to revoke, and I began taking back what was mine. The core of the platform had been built around modular bridges I had developed myself. Not borrowed. Not contracted out. My code. My logic. My proprietary methods. When I licensed the architecture to the company, I had rented them access to these systems. I had never sold ownership. And now I was simply reclaiming what I had always owned. Not deleting. Not destroying. Withdrawing. The first elements to go were the API harmonizers, small, elegant background processes that kept data flowing seamlessly across client dashboards. They synchronized time zones, currencies, timestamps, the kind of invisible machinery that nobody ever thinks about because, when it works perfectly, it generates no noise. I had tucked them deep inside the framework, beneath layers of legacy code that nobody else understood well enough to navigate. Without them, lag. The next morning, reports loaded 5 seconds slower than usual. Nothing dramatic. Probably just a slow server day. By afternoon, 15 seconds. By the following morning, a handful of clients in Australia were finding that reports simply weren't generating at all. The error message in the system logs was clean and technical and completely uninformative to anyone who hadn't written the underlying code themselves. Null return on sync cascade. Harmless sounding. Quietly catastrophic. By midweek, the sales dashboard, Samantha's favorite tool, the one she pulled up in every client meeting to demonstrate the platform's elegance, froze mid-presentation. Her assistant posted in the company's Slack channel with a specific tone of someone trying to seem calm. Glitching again. Anyone know what's up with a client Delta tab? Nobody knew. Because the client Delta tab ran on a query engine I had written in my second year at Onyx, an experimental script that optimized memory calls by redistributing server load dynamically. It wasn't in any documentation. It wasn't open source. It had never been explained to anyone because I was always there to maintain it. Now it was gone. The theories were wonderful. Engineering blamed vendor latency. Someone suggested clearing the cache. A junior analyst with real creative energy floated the idea that it was a DDoS test from the cybersecurity team. No one thought to ask me, because I was just the legacy advisor, the background noise, the woman who had been so thoroughly erased from the meeting calendars and org charts that apparently it had never occurred to anyone that the systems might be connected to the person who built them. I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. Meanwhile, Chloe had begun her transformation into something she had not yet earned. She started wearing heels to the office, not because she needed to, but because she liked the sound. You could hear her coming down the hallway 20 seconds before she arrived. Click, click, click. Like little announcements. Like punctuation marks declaring her presence before she had said anything worth punctuating. She had started introducing herself in meetings as the director's liaison. There was no such role. No one corrected her. She had begun replying to emails that had originally been sent to me, not out of malice, exactly, just that particular brand of overreaching ambition that mistakes proximity to power for power itself. She took over one of the recurring syncs I used to lead, announcing it as an opportunity to explore fresh perspectives. On Wednesday afternoon, I passed the breakout room and caught the end of a phone call she was apparently having with someone important enough to warrant her most confident voice. I think we're going to sunset some of the legacy logic. It's causing all sorts of data artifacts. I've flagged the Ginny modules for review. I stopped walking. The Ginny modules. She said it the way you might say the old filing cabinet or that outdated printer. Like these were dusty relics. Remnants of a previous era. Things to be cleared away so that she could build her paper palace on a clean slate. Later that day, I walked into the analytics room, The one with the floor-to-ceiling glass walls and the giant system dashboard that used to pulse with live data from every client we served, and found Chloe standing at the console with an overwhelmed IT intern, confidently rattling off theories about the error messages filling the screen. I didn't announce myself. I walked up, leaned slightly over her shoulder, and said quietly, "Those data artifacts aren't coming from the modules. They're the result of the bridge variables being disconnected. That only happens when someone disables the mapping layer." She turned, blinked. I didn't disable anything." "No," I said calmly. "But you told the team to stop loading the legacy reconcilers. Those are the mapping layer." "I was told they weren't essential anymore." "By who?" She didn't answer. I turned to the intern, who had the expression of someone deeply relieved that an adult had arrived. "The errors you're seeing are because the system is reverting to default sync logic. It's not equipped to handle multi-point currency drift without the patch layer. That's why you're getting null returns on Q3 projections." He nodded, grateful, visibly relieved. I turned back to Chloe. "You might want to slow down on trying to erase people's work. Some of us built this place from the ground up, and we didn't use glue sticks and buzzwords." She flushed, lifted her chin. "I'm just trying to optimize what's here. Isn't that the goal?" I let the silence stretch for exactly one beat too long. Optimize. But don't pretend you understand something when you don't. That's not leadership. That's performance. I walked out. Behind me, the dashboard flickered. One more glitch in a growing pile. And Chloe had no idea that the system had already begun rejecting her presence the way a body rejects a transplant that doesn't belong. When it finally collapsed, she would be standing in the center of the wreckage, heels and all. By Friday, chaos had grown legs and started running. What had begun as isolated delays and minor sync errors had spread across the platform like cracks through tempered glass, invisible at first, then suddenly everywhere at once. Reports failed to compile. Forecasts looped into empty datasets. Dashboards that had displayed clean, beautiful real-time data for years now blinked red, not with useful alerts, just confusion. Inputs that had always flowed through the system like water now jammed mid-process, leaving half-rendered visualizations frozen on monitors across 3 continents. The engineering team's Slack channel had become a war zone. Bug reports, conflicting theories, increasingly panicked emoji reactions, and the particular energy of a group of smart people trying to solve a problem none of them can locate. They were throwing around terms like stack overflow, memory bleed, invisible bottleneck. Nobody could agree on a cause because too many systems were involved, too many interdependencies that had never been properly documented because the person who built them had always simply been there to explain them. And leadership, bless them, kept issuing instructions. Patch it. Restart the node. Try a rollback. But this wasn't a bug. It was an unraveling. And I was watching it happen from my living room, calm as still water, sipping tea and monitoring the public-facing uptime dashboards as the red indicators multiplied. Then came the email from Gary Kim. Saturday night just after 10. Subject line. Not a coincidence. Ginny, I know you're probably not checking these anymore. I heard what happened, and I'm sorry. But I've been digging through the system logs, and I don't think this is random. It all traces back to the same subsystem degradation patterns. None of the new devs understand how half the platform actually works. Chloe's been pushing hard to strip out your modules, and now everything's falling apart. I'm not accusing. I just wanted to say, I see it. I read it twice. Then I deleted it. Not because I was guilty of anything, but because there was nothing left to explain. I wasn't in the system anymore. I wasn't in the meetings or on the org chart or in the credits. I wasn't anywhere they could point to. And that was my greatest power. Absence. They had spent months trying to make me invisible. Now they were learning what it actually meant to exist without me. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning. 8:13 a.m. Subject line. Lunch. Ginny, I've been following the Onyx situation. If you're free this week, I'd love to talk. I think it's time we revisited that conversation from last year.
Lunch is on me.
Bring your fire.
Nora.
Nora Lynn, CEO of Salvix, then still called Diamond, a company that was doing quietly extraordinary things in enterprise AI infrastructure. She had offered me a senior leadership role the year before, when Salvix was just beginning to break into the enterprise sector. I had turned her down. Too loyal to Onyx. Too invested in fixing something that, as it turned out, didn't want to be fixed. Nora hadn't held it against me. She wasn't the type to hold things against people. She had simply left the door open and walked away with the calm confidence of someone who knows you'll eventually come through it. We met at a quiet cafe downtown, the kind of place with heavy ceramic mugs and linen napkins, and an unspoken agreement that laptops don't belong here. Nora arrived in a navy suit that looked like it had been tailored specifically for the way she carried herself. When she saw me, she stood, arms open, with the warmth of someone who remembers exactly who you were before the world tried to edit you. "You look taller," she said, smiling as we sat. "Must be the burnout," I replied. "It lifts your soul a little when you stop pretending to be okay." She laughed softly. "I heard things are turbulent. Turbulent is polite." We moved through the pleasantries quickly, and then she leaned forward and said what she had come to say. "I want to make you an offer. Not a job. Not a title. I want to give you a runway." I raised an eyebrow. "I've been watching what you built at Onyx for years. The architecture is clean, modular, genuinely scalable. We need something like it. But more than the system, we need the mind that made it." "You want to buy the system?" "I'd rather buy into it," she said. "Or better yet, partner with you to build something better. Something fully yours. I can fund the infrastructure. You lead the vision. You define the product, the roadmap, the brand. Call it whatever you want. Own every piece of it. We back you, we give you the team, and we get out of your way." My throat tightened. It wasn't a pitch. It wasn't a rescue. It was something I hadn't been offered in so long, I had almost forgotten it existed. Recognition. "I'm not asking you to join Salvix," Nora said. "I'm asking if you're ready to build what they told you could never exist. A company that runs on your rules, your values, your name on the door." I didn't answer immediately. I looked out the window at the street below, the city moving at its own pace, indifferent and alive, not waiting for anyone's permission. And I felt something shift. Not bitterness. Not fear. Not the calculating coldness that had settled into me at the celebration. Freedom. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about how to stay relevant in someone else's machine. I was thinking about what I could build with my own two hands, on my own terms, with my own name attached to every blueprint. I turned back to Nora. "Let's talk terms." There was one more thing I needed to do. The building looked exactly the same. Cold steel exterior, blue glass that reflected the sky back at you with a kind of corporate optimism that had always felt slightly dishonest. The lobby mural, "Innovate with Integrity," was still there, still earnest, still displayed prominently above the security desk. I walked past it without breaking stride. Past the new receptionist who didn't recognize me. Past security, badged through with credentials nobody had thought to deactivate. Into the elevator. Down to the third floor, the one nobody visited unless something had broken beyond the team's ability to fix it. The server room. The air hit me the moment the door opened. Dry, cool, humming with the particular energy of machines that never sleep. Banks of servers stretching into the dark, indicator lights blinking in steady rhythms, the quiet heartbeat of a system that had kept an entire company alive for 4 years. I walked past the racks to the small table in the corner. From my bag, I removed a sealed envelope and a folded piece of thick cardstock. The cardstock held a diagram, the original blueprint of the Onyx system architecture. Not the partial versions scattered across internal wikis and half-updated documentation files. The complete map. Every thread, every dependency, every connection that made the whole thing work. No one else had ever seen it in full. The letter was brief. To whom it may concern. January arrived with cold mornings and quiet evenings that Laura found she didn't mind at all. She didn't call her parents for New Year's. They didn't call her. The silence that had once felt like punishment began to feel, slowly, like relief. Like the absence of something that had been pressing against her chest for so long she'd forgotten it was there. But not everyone stayed quiet. First came a message from her Aunt Carol, her mother's older sister, a woman who meant well and understood very little. Your mother says you've been distant. She's heartbroken. Family matters, Laura. Then her cousin Linda called, ostensibly just to chat. Within 10 minutes the conversation had circled around to, your mom did everything she could. Maybe it's time to let it go. Life's short. Laura listened politely and changed the subject each time. She understood what was happening. Her parents weren't calling directly, they were deploying emissaries. Sending people with softer voices and kinder faces to deliver the same message. Come back, stop causing trouble, get back in your place. It was manipulation wrapped carefully in the language of concern, designed to push just enough guilt that Laura would question herself without them ever having to say the words out loud. Then came the letter. Handwritten. No return address. Her mother's neat, almost clinical script across the page. We don't understand why you're choosing to estrange yourself from your family. We've given you everything. You have a roof over your head today because of us. You may not like how we live or who we prefer to spend time with, but that's not your place to judge. You have responsibilities to us, Laura. You are our daughter. That still means something whether you like it or not. No mention of Thomas. No mention of Grace. No mention of Eric. No acknowledgement of what had been said. No apology. Just obligation dressed as love. Debt wearing the clothes of family. Laura read it once, folded it, and placed it in a drawer she hadn't opened in years. The same drawer that held her first report cards, a dried corsage from prom, and a single birthday card from her mother dated 2006. Then, on a gray Sunday afternoon in February, her phone rang.
Mom.
Laura stepped out onto the porch before answering. The cold air was sharp and clarifying. Hello. Well, her mother said. Cold, but contained. It's been a while.
Yes.
It has. You didn't call for New Year's. No, I didn't. You didn't reply to my letter.
I received it, Laura said.
There wasn't anything to respond to. A pause. When her mother spoke again, her tone had shifted. Not warm, not soft, but calculated. Your father's been unwell. We might need help with some medical bills. Nothing serious, just expenses that piled up. Laura closed her eyes. I haven't turned on anyone, she said, before her mother could continue. I've just stopped pretending things are fine. You've always been dramatic. No, Laura said, her voice steadier now than it had ever been in any conversation with her mother. I've always been quiet. That's different. Silence. You're our daughter. You owe us at least a conversation. I'm giving you one now, but I'm not giving you money. Not anymore. And I'm not giving you parts of myself in exchange for being tolerated. That's how you see it. It's how it's always been. I just didn't want to see it before. Her mother's voice sharpened slightly. And what is it you want now, exactly? Laura looked out at the yard. Eric and the children were there, Thomas and Grace chasing each other through the snow, Eric laughing as Grace pelted him with a badly aimed snowball. I want peace, Laura said simply. And I want my children to grow up never having to wonder if they're enough. Her mother said nothing. I hope Dad gets better, Laura added. I genuinely do. But I won't be stepping back into a role that was only ever convenient for you. You're making a mistake. No, Laura said quietly. I'm correcting one. She hung up, and this time, she didn't sit alone in silence afterward. She walked back inside, poured a coffee, and went out to the porch where her family was. Grace handed her a snowball with a giggle, and Laura threw it, and for the first time in longer than she could measure, she laughed without anything underneath it. No guilt, no calculation, no wondering if she was enough. Just laughing. The weeks that followed were the slow unfurling of something Laura hadn't realized she had been holding closed. She bought herself flowers at the market without hesitating. She started journaling again. She took on new bookkeeping clients on her own terms, with boundaries she no longer felt guilty about enforcing. She painted the hallway a color she had been wanting for 2 years. She blocked her mother's number, then Ryan's, then her father's. Not in anger, not as a declaration, just as a necessity, the simple act of creating a space where their voices could no longer reach. Eric noticed. You're sleeping better, he said one morning, and she smiled and kissed his shoulder and didn't explain because she didn't need to. Then, one afternoon in March, Ryan's name appeared in her email inbox.
Hey.
Can we talk for a moment? I swear it's not about Mom. Out of something that was more curiosity than anything else, she agreed. She chose a park near her home.
Public.
Open. No pressure. She sat on a bench in the pale early spring sunlight and waited. Ryan arrived looking the same as always. Expensive jacket, practiced confidence, but something in his expression was different. More careful. Less certain of its welcome. I didn't come to fight, he said quickly, sitting down. I think we owe each other a straight conversation. This system was never hacked. It was never sabotaged. It was withdrawn. Ownership is more than a legal document, it is trust. You broke that. I no longer owe access to something you never respected. You will rebuild. You will recover. But it will not be on my back. Ginny Harper. I placed the letter beneath the diagram, on the table where someone would find it when they finally came looking for answers. The servers blinked behind me, quietly, steadily, unaware that they had just become orphans. I turned to leave, and nearly walked directly into Chloe. She was in the hallway, clipboard in hand, eyes wide with the manufactured urgency of someone who had been very busy performing competence in the middle of a crisis she didn't understand. We both stopped.
Ginny, she said.
The word came out like she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to see. You're here? Are you fixing something? I looked at her for a moment. The too tight blazer. The shoes clicking slightly out of rhythm. The clipboard held at an angle that telegraphed importance. No, I said quietly. I'm finishing something. She blinked. Her chin came up defensive. We're stabilizing things. It's just some legacy junk. Nothing we can't untangle. I took one step closer. You think you're in control, I said. Not as a question. That you inherited something. A pause. Here's the truth, Chloe. She straightened, bracing. You didn't lose me, I said, holding her gaze. You never had me. She flinched. Not dramatically. Just enough. The small, quiet flinch of a wound that hasn't quite registered yet. The kind that doesn't sting until the echo catches up. I walked to the elevator. The doors opened immediately, as if they'd been waiting. I stepped inside, pressed the lobby button, and watched the doors close. Not angry. Not triumphant. Not heartbroken. Just done. Real collapse doesn't announce itself. That's the thing nobody tells you. It doesn't arrive with sirens and warning labels. It begins like a hairline fracture beneath polished marble. Invisible, structural, patient, and then one day you step in the wrong place and the whole floor gives way. Onyx Tech began to bleed. Customer service hold times doubled, then tripled. Clients in Asia-Pacific reported missing sync logs. European partners found their dashboards loading blank. The error reports multiplied, small, frantic, impossible to triage because they were coming from everywhere at once. By day 4, the infrastructure was buckling under the weight of its own confusion. API calls were timing out. Data wasn't syncing. Recovery protocols failed because the auto-clean scripts I had written, maintained, and quietly updated for years, were no longer present to run them. The servers weren't down. Not exactly. They were simply running a language they had never fully learned without me there to translate. Inside headquarters, the calm had turned to shouting. Department heads pointed fingers across conference tables. Slack threads descended into chaos. Emergency escalation. Failover not responding. Who has the root access logs? Chloe had gone silent. Samantha Velam had retreated behind external communications strategy. And Martin Velam, the CEO who had stood under a spotlight talking about visionaries and risk-takers, was reportedly on his 4th emergency call with investors before noon. I watched it from my laptop. Not through backdoors or unauthorized access. Just public-facing system dashboards, uptime monitors, the same information anyone could see if they knew where to look. I sipped tea and watched the red indicators multiply in real time. Screenshots of error messages began appearing on LinkedIn. A former client posted a thread that went viral. We were promised world-class infrastructure. Today our team spent 8 hours rebuilding from scratch. Never again. By the end of the week, 3 major clients had publicly announced they were ending their contracts. The stock dropped 12%. Industry publications began asking questions about what had gone wrong at a company that had been celebrating record revenues just weeks before. What had gone wrong was very simple. They had removed the person who built the machine, thinking the machine would keep running. They were wrong. Every line of code that handled the difficult problems, every hidden patch that caught errors before they cascaded, every preventative trigger and background process and undocumented function, all of it had been mine. Invisible scaffolding. The kind of work that nobody appreciates until it's gone because when it's working perfectly it generates no noise at all. I had taken my beams when I left. And the house, the beautiful, award-winning, $3.2 billion house, was falling down. The auditorium was packed. Investors, technology journalists, enterprise executives, the specific crowd that gathers when something genuinely new is about to be announced. The room was cool and blue-lit, cinematic, cameras floating on robotic arms above the audience. On the main screen, a sleek animation looped silently, introducing Vaunt, the future of adaptive intelligence. And then I walked on stage. Not to applause. Not at first. Just to the particular silence of a room full of people who recognize a face from somewhere and are trying to remember where. Recognition moving across the crowd in a slow wave. A whisper here, a leaned-in exchange there, heads tilting, eyes narrowing. Isn't she the one who? I wasn't wearing a power suit. Just a simple black blazer, soft blouse, and the specific quiet confidence of someone who no longer requires anyone's permission to exist in a room. I stood at the podium. Let the silence settle completely. Then I said, I didn't leave the system. A pause. 1,000 held breaths. I rebuilt it. The silence cracked open. And the applause that followed was not polite. Not professional. Not the measured response of people performing approval. It was the sound of recognition, genuine, electric, the specific feeling of a crowd realizing they're watching a reckoning unfold in real time. Behind me, the screen changed. 2 diagrams, side by side. On the left, the Onyx platform architecture, the one I had built 4 years ago in a company that was bleeding out. On the right, Vaunt. At first glance, similar. Look closer. Cleaner logic, smarter infrastructure, more elegant dependencies. Not a copy. An evolution. The work of someone who had already built the best version of this once, and had now built something better. Within an hour, my name was trending. She was the brain behind Onyx all along. Onyx collapses, and she rises. Salvix's secret weapon wasn't a product, it was a person. I didn't scroll through all of it. I didn't need to. When I stepped off the stage, Nora was waiting in the wings, eyes bright. That, she said quietly, wasn't a launch.
She paused.
That was a reckoning. I smiled. Not for the cameras. Not for the trending hashtags. Not for Martin Velam or Samantha or anyone in that glittering conference hall who had clinked champagne glasses while I stood invisible 20 feet from the stage. For me. For every 14-hour day that no one saw. For every boardroom I had been dismissed in. For every report rewritten under someone else's name. For every sticky note I had saved because no one else was going to tell me my work mattered. I didn't burn their system down. I built something better. And this time, my name was on every single piece of it. Chloe watched the live stream from her desk at Onyx Tech. She had been in the middle of something, a report, a meeting prep, another attempt to stabilize a platform she still didn't fully understand, when the conference alert came through and she opened it out of the reflexive professional habit of staying informed. And then there was Ginny's face, filling the screen, the applause. Chloe sat very still. She watched the whole thing. The diagrams, the side-by-side comparisons, the trending hashtag, the LinkedIn comments piling up in real time, people saying the name she had heard described as legacy, as background noise, as modules flagged for review. It sank in slowly, the way cold water rises. Ginny hadn't disappeared, hadn't crumbled, hadn't faded into the professional obscurity that everyone had assumed was her natural destination. She had simply been building. Quietly, cleanly, while Chloe had been clicking down hallways in heels and introducing herself by a title that didn't exist. Chloe felt something in her chest that wasn't jealousy, wasn't anger, wasn't the clean, defensive emotion she might have preferred. It was regret. She thought about the first months at Onyx, how she had genuinely admired Ginny, had watched her work with something close to awe, how they had laughed over coffee during onboarding, how at some point, somewhere along the way, titles had started being distributed like favors and ambition had begun to whisper louder than gratitude, and she had let herself believe that proximity to power was the same thing as earning it. She had stood near someone brilliant and mistaken the light for her own. Brilliance doesn't work that way. You either earn it or you borrow it. And borrowed light disappears the moment the source walks away. By the end of the week, the director's liaison title had been quietly removed from her profile. Her responsibilities shrank. The meetings she had been invited to as part of Samantha's orbit began happening without her. She had become, in the space of one conference live stream, a cautionary tale, the person who had been standing closest to the collapse, holding the clipboard, when the walls came down. She was still at Onyx. She survived the fallout, technically. But surviving is not the same as thriving, and she understood now the difference between the two. Sometimes at night, she would open LinkedIn and scroll past Vaughn's latest announcement. Another enterprise partnership. Another product milestone. Ginny's name in the headline, in the caption on the blueprint. She thought about sending a message. Something simple. I didn't see you clearly until it was too late.
I'm sorry.
She never sent it. Some absences aren't meant to be repaired. They're meant to be understood. Months later, Ginny stood on the rooftop terrace of the Vaughn headquarters. 4 floors of clean glass and curved wood and deliberate quiet, the kind of building designed for people who think rather than people who perform. Below her, the city moved. The usual hum of traffic, the distant punctuation of horns, the particular energy of a world that doesn't wait for anyone. Up here, the noise faded. She watched her team, through the wide windows below. Engineers, designers, strategists, people who had chosen to build something honest, who showed up every day not because they were told to, but because the work meant something. Vaughn had just signed its 3rd major enterprise partnership. Investors called weekly. The industry press had settled into a comfortable narrative. Visionary, tech renegade, systemic disruptor. Ginny didn't flinch at any of it. She'd learned, the hard way, not to need it. The real reward was simpler than any headline. She was free. She was respected. And every morning when she walked into that building, her name was on the door. Not as a footnote. Not as a legacy advisor. Not as a sticky note saved in a box under her couch. Her name. Her choices. Her rules. Her company. Built with her hands on her terms for the first time, from the very beginning. Don't confuse someone's grace for weakness. Don't mistake quiet for insignificant. Don't assume that because someone isn't fighting back visibly, they aren't preparing something you haven't imagined yet. Ginny didn't destroy Onyx Tech. She just stopped holding it up. She took back what was always hers, built something better, and walked into a room full of people who finally said her name out loud, not because she demanded it, not because she fought for it, but because the work spoke so clearly that silence was no longer possible. The most powerful thing she ever did wasn't technical. It wasn't contractual. It wasn't strategic. It was the decision to stop giving her best work to people who had decided she wasn't worth keeping. Some people don't shout.
They rise.
If this story gave you that deep, satisfied feeling of watching talent finally get what it deserved, smash that like button because it genuinely helps more than you know. Subscribe for more stories like this. Corporate comebacks, quiet power, and the deeply satisfying moment when the invisible person becomes impossible to ignore. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever been the person doing all the work while someone else took the stage? I want to hear your story. And the next video is right there waiting for you. Don't keep it waiting.